Okay, the subject of this video is going to be Aliester Crowley and his influence on rock and roll. This is the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band album, and I want to thank Les Harris for loaning it to me here. So this idiot here is Aliester Crowley. He was considered the wickedest man alive, the leading Satanist of the last century. Here's a picture of him as a kid, and he was already past. He started off, as most of them do, studying Rosicrucianism, and this is the greatest of the Rosicrucian pictures and parables. It's said that in Rosicrucianism, if you just understand this, you understand everything Rosicrucianism. But that was way too tame for him. And so by the time he was a teenager, he had already gone and started getting into the Order of the Golden Dawn. Well, that was also too tame for him. So he started going into devil worshiping and Satanism, and he started the Temple of Thelema. He came from aristocracy, so he had money in England, and him and two other guys got a whole bunch of basically sluts, and they started doing sex magic at this thing called the Temple of Philemon. Well, a funny thing about the Temple of Philemon, again, there he is. The Temple of Philemon, or Feldmana, there's two different ways you can say it. Barbara Bush's mother, whose surname or maiden name was Pierce, used to hang out there. And she never admitted to who the father of Barbara was. Barbara was born out of wedlock. Well, there was three guys there, maybe a fourth one, so a 25% chance that was her dad. And so if you wanted to really, push that out there, you could say that George W. Bush was the grandfather of the beast, because that's what Aliester Crowley fashioned himself after. He thought he was the great beast. And at the end of his life, he was upset because he wasn't indwelt by Satan to become the Antichrist. He was a pederast, a pedophile. A lot of sex magic involves homosexuality and ritual sodomy. He was into all that. He liked girls too. He just did everything. And the reason he's on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, remember that album was originally going to be called Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, but then they told him that well, there's a big giant cola drink called Dr. Pepper, so they changed it to Sgt. Pepper. And everybody made lists of people to put on the cover of this. These four guys, and some other people had some input too. So like Johnny Weissmuller's on here, Nietzsche's on here, a whole lot of ne'er-do-wells, all these yogis that influenced the Beatles. The yogis primarily influenced George Harrison. There's Edgar Allan Poe. There's that piece of shit Karl Marx. There's even Tom Nix, and there's another sodomite there, Oscar Wilde. But John Lennon specifically, he actually misspelled his name on there. He misspelled Aliester. He also misspelled Nietzsche. And if you can go do the look back, that he actually tried to get a book from somebody about Nietzsche at a bookstore, that John Lennon knew a guy and sent him over there, and the guy had to correct him on the spelling of Nietzsche and how to pronounce it. But anyway, so Aliester Crowley is also the model for Fester in the Addams Family. Towards the end of his life, he shaved his head. And if you look at an old picture of him just before he died, he looks kind of bug-eyed, and he looks a whole lot like Barbara Bush. Well, let's go to the lyrics. It was 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. Well, it was basically 20 years before this, Aliester Crowley died. Aliester Crowley felt he was underappreciated in his lifetime, and he just missed it by about 20 years because the 60s would have been his decade. And a lot of rock people really got into Aliester Crowley. They still do. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin bought his old mansion, tried to channel his spirit. He's bought everything he can of Aliester Crowley. If you'll notice, Ozzy Osbourne has a song called Mr. Crowley. Well, this is the one he's talking about. And even in the show Supernatural, one of the chief demons in it is called Crowley. It's a nod to this idiot. So this guy was into devil worshiping. He called the devil by a bunch of different names. He said it was the Age of Horus, and he was going to be the avatar for it. And he wrote several books, and John Lennon had several copies of his books, his black magic books. He's most famous probably for the book the Book of the Law. And that was a big 60s counterculture book read by Timothy O'Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote the Illuminati trilogy. By the way, Robert Anton Wilson was the guy that invented the peace sign. Now, there'll be various reasons why people tell you the peace sign. They tell you it's the reverse of the victory sign that the English used to hold their fingers up to show that they could pull up a crossbow and that, but it was actually a takeoff of the blessing in the Roman Catholic Church, and it was to and Robert Anton Wilson says this in several, and his books are fairly interesting. He was a lost soul, but he was a smart guy, and he said they were protesting nuclear power, and so he says it there that he was the one that created the peace sign. Forget everything else you've heard of or whatever. Anyway, back to Aliester Crowley. So he taught, like I said, it mentions it in the Sgt. Pepper's thing that 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. Well, like I said, he missed his calling by about 2 decades. Now, he taught repeatedly over and over again, walk backwards, pray backwards, say your incantations backwards, and if the backward masking that was involved in rock music back in the 70s. If you had an old turnstile, you could play the record backward and they would hide messages on there. Most famous one is Stairway to Heaven. It says, "Hail Satan, hail Satan." Aliester Crowley snuck into the Great Pyramid and spent the night in there and asked to be indwelled by a spirit. So this is the spirit that he drew a picture of, that he said came in here, and it was this familiar spirit basically the rest of his life. It was a demon called Lamb. I want you to take a good look at Lamb there. And who does he remind you of? Well, he reminds you of the little gray aliens. Even the indentations in his head. See the indentations here. These are several of Aliester Crowley's actual drawings of it. And here's a evolution of it. So, and here's the guy, the demon Crowley from Supernatural, who's also named after Aliester Crowley. So, I'm going to bring this up. Like I said, Crowley died of opioid addiction later in life, but as a young man, he was a mountain climber and did all kinds of set kind of records for mountain climbing back in the day. That was a big thing back then. And want to bring this up. So there was this real famous scientist, he's still alive, named Jacques Vallée. Well, he had notoriety doing stuff in scientific fields, and he decided to throw himself into the study of UFOs. And if you watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, remember Lacombe, the guy that was doing the hand signals and the phonetic, playing the organ to attract the UFOs? He was patterned after Jacques Vallée. And Jacques Vallée, after studying this for 20 years, came to the conclusion that the same people that ran haunted houses ran UFOs. demonic possession and UFO abduction, a lot of the same stuff happens. They're probed. They always say, they all talk about a universal force. They never talk about there being a God, and it's a false narrative put up by demons. So the UFOs are demonic entities in them, and like I said, the Beatles are responsible for a lot of lost people. Their songs, and all these people that they glorified, and they wanted to put Hitler on here. They did actually want to put Jesus on there, but those both were deemed too controversial. But they put a bunch of weirdos on here. Like I said, there's the POS, Karl Marx, the other sodomites. Oh, there's another sodomite, by the way. And there's some famous people that didn't really do anything, like W.C. Fields is on here. And here's another famous rock guy from the time who admitted on 60 Minutes that he sold his soul to the devil, even though there was a time he was talking about God a lot, but he admitted to on 60 Minutes that his God was the devil. And so anyway, Aliester Crowley, the Great Beast, really influenced rock and roll and still does, and he wasn't anything except a demon-infested soul. And don't read anything, don't go down that path. Stay away from him, stay away from Nietzsche. Nietzsche did have a saying, if you stare long enough into the abyss will stare into you. And Nietzsche's on this cover too. And remember, Nietzsche contracted venereal disease, and about 1 out of 10 people that got venereal disease, because it couldn't treat it at the time, it jacks up your intellect. And it wouldn't surprise me if this weirdo Aliester Crowley had the same thing, jacking up his brain power along the wrong paths though. Anyway, check it out. Thank you. I'm out.